Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella Herrera. Maricella, how is it going for you today?
It's going really well. I'm in Miami, which is sunny and bright. So it's been good. It's been good to be out in the sun and weather that's more natural to me.
Well, I have to say, so much has changed the past couple of years, and COVID and remote and all this stuff. But one thing that has not changed is talking about the weather.
Well,
because every conversation I've had this today has opened up with the weather.
Well, it's such an important part of our lives, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I really get seasonal affective disorder and get really influenced by the weather. Like when it's dark and cold in New York, every year around this time, I question why I moved to New York and why I'm staying there. It's real. Like I've been in Miami for a few days, and I swear I already started looking for rentals.
Oh my goodness, you're breaking my heart.
Well, I did that when I was in London too, so I think I'm just in an exploratory mood.
A girl can dream.
Yeah.
Well, you just have to get like a 2-bedroom so I can come crash with you. Obviously. Well, I'm glad you're in some warmer temps, and best of luck for this weekend in your big race.
I mean, when this comes out, I will have hopefully finished and ran the half marathon, but when we're recording it, it's still a couple of days away. So I'm very nervous, very, very nervous. You know what? One of the biggest things that makes me nervous is that I may not wake up to get there in time, because my start time is 6:30. And I don't do mornings.
I do know that. Do you want me to call you at 6:30 in the morning?
I
know your start time is 6:30, so you have to be up at like 4:30.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's making me nervous, but I'm sure it'll be good. I can't wait to be able to talk about it and tell you guys. I mentioned it at the roundtable this week. As you know, we always, at Ellevate, we host our weekly roundtables with different groups, and Kristy hosts the executive roundtable on Tuesdays, and I host the Rising Leaders roundtable on Thursdays. I told them, like, they saw me in a different space, and I was like, yeah, I'm in Miami, and told them what I was here for. And everyone was really, really amazingly supportive, and like sent me messages afterwards wishing me luck. And they're like, well, come back next week to see like how it went. You let us know. So if you're looking for a great supportive group, you can find them in our roundtables. I can say that from personal experience.
Yeah, I agree. And, Maricella, like I've been thinking a good bit about goals and the goals we set for ourselves. And, I get the sense, if our listeners are like I am, I set a goal and I want to accomplish it immediately. It's like, okay, like let's get this done, and then when I feel like I'm not making progress towards it, it can be, disheartening and frustrating. But in reality, it takes time to make change, to make progress. You've been training for this for so long, and there were so many stops and starts with COVID and everything else. And so it's not about that timeline. It's just about, putting the one foot in front of the other and making it across that line. And yeah, you've got a whole bunch of support here for you, and we're cheering you on. I'm really proud of you.
Aw, thanks. Yeah, it is about putting one foot in front of the other. I mean, I have to remind myself that when I train too. Sometimes you'll have bad days, sometimes you'll have good days. I went for a run 2 days ago and I almost died because I've been running in the cold of New York, and suddenly I'm like humid Florida. But it's okay. It's little by little.
Well, and I think it's also pretty special when you can talk about these things in the workplace. And, oftentimes we feel that we have to leave our passions and our identity at the, I guess, virtual door, if you will. But you've been really transparent about training. You and I were on a call, and then you're like, I have to go run after this. But it's just all those small and big ways in which you are able to not just be your true self, but then have those champions on your team that you see every day who ask how your run is doing and encourage you to go run. And if you're going to slack after our meeting, I'm going to say, no, go run. So, yeah, it's pretty special.
Yeah, I really appreciate the support I've gotten. And I think that that's what makes Ellevate really special. And I think that that's what I would love to see in more companies, right? Like, how can you embrace your employees as their human self, not just as little worker bees? Because we all have our passions and our priorities in our life. And, I don't have kids, but I have other things that take up my time and my energy and my mind.
Well, this is something we're going to be talking about at Mobilize Women this year, which happens in June, and it's something we're always incredibly passionate about. And one of the topics is creating a workplace that retains your workforce, and flipping the script from the Great Resignation, oh no, everyone's leaving, to there's still a lot of people staying, and why are they staying, and how do you ensure that you're building a workplace that is driving retention, that's driving engagement, inclusivity, and is really a place where people want to be.
Yeah, and it's not a secret. Caring about people, that helps. But yes, it'll be a great I can't wait. I'm very excited about the topics for Mobilize Women. We'll be announcing all of them shortly, but that one is incredibly interesting. I'm a sucker and super passionate about mental health, so I'm really excited about talking about how the landscape is changing and what the effect of some of these mental health tech companies blitzscaling is having on the population, and the effects of COVID in our mental health, particularly for young adults. So there will be a lot of different things to cover. It's June 8th online, and hopefully you can join us.
Yes, please join us, as it impacts us as employees, as allies, as managers, business owners, and beyond. Let's create the world that we want to live in. And that has a lot to do with our guest today, Sandra Sucher, who's an internationally recognized trust researcher and professor of management practice at Harvard Business School. She's an expert on how companies build, lose, and regain trust, and is the author of The Power to Trust. And so, Maricella, just as we're talking about, the conversations we'll be having at Mobilize Women, how you build a company where people want to stay and work and are inspired to be there, that's a lot of Sandra's work as well. How do companies really build trust, trust for their partners, their employees, their customers, and beyond. And in a time that we're living in now, trust is everything. And people, as we're seeing, can easily move. They can easily, change where they work or who they buy from. So being intentional about building that trust is key for businesses and for those of us who work within them.
Not just for businesses, for anything, any relationship, right? Trust is the basis. I'm a follower of the whole radical candor way of managing, but also of living in a way. And one part of it is caring deeply about the people that you work with. And that means care for them so that you build that trust, not just like surface level. The reality is trust is gained. And a lot of the times we're like, oh, why don't you trust me? But it's something that you work for and that you consciously have to make yourself push for with the relationships that you actually care about.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Let's get to my conversation with Sandra. Hello, Sandra. Welcome to the Ellevate podcast.
Oh, Kristy, thanks so much.
I am so excited to have you here. Our listeners will learn more in a moment about why. As we were talking before we started taping, the work that you do is something that personally I find very important, and very important that we as leaders and as consumers and employees and just humans continue to think about and talk about with intention and depth. But before we get to that, let's learn about you. Sandra, could you share with our listeners a bit about who you are? and how you got to where you are today?
I'd be glad to. So I'm a professor at Harvard Business School. I'm a professor of management practice, and what that means is that I came from industry. So I have an MBA from HBS, and I thought I was going to be a professor, but then I had never worked in business. So I left for what I thought would just be a couple of years to get some business experience, and it turned out to be like more than 20, 25 to be exact. And so I've had a career in three chunks. Chunk one, when I left HBS, was to join fashion retailing. So I was in Federated Department Stores, Filene's Basement, and I wrote the proposal to expand Filene's Basement from a single store in downtown Boston to a national chain, now defunct, sadly, but nonetheless a really great business. I then joined Fidelity Investments, and I was their chief quality officer. So I've spent most of my career trying to help organizations do what they want to do better. I'm kind of an organizational improver and particularly interested in kind of a process view of organizations, which is a way of thinking about, so if you've got a customer at one end, what are all the steps you have to go through to satisfy that customer at the other end? And then, after a couple of decades in industry, I thought if I was ever going to do this teaching thing, I would have to get back. And so as it turned out that when I was interested in returning, Harvard Business School was at that time quite interested in having people join the faculty, still is, who come from industry. And who can bring to their research, other people's research, a view from practice and what it's like to try to actually implement some of these great ideas that we study. So, personally, I'm a mom, I'm a grandma, I have two 4 and 6-year-old granddaughters, and I'm a COVID puppy owner. I have a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, and so I grew up in Detroit, which almost no one lays claim to, and so I'd say that's about me.
And can you share, I'm curious, how much of the work you do is research versus the teaching? I mean, talk to me about your role a little bit more.
So the work that I do is based in research that we do for teaching. So most of my research is done writing case studies about businesses, and it was actually through writing a case study that I first started to really think about trust in a very particular sense. And so it's sort of hard to distinguish. I don't have a separate research track and a separate teaching track. All the research that I do aims to try to help people who are executives do a better job, and it informs everything that I teach.
And so talk to me about trust. I mean, clearly, as you told your story and the work you did, it was this thread woven through so much of your work, and now is really, a big part of your legacy with this research that you're working on. What is trust to you? How would you define it?
So I'm going to define it in a way that is defined actually in the academic literature, because I could lock all of us in a room for about an hour and we'd come out sort of tired and unable to really get our arms around what trust is. And so a lot of the research has been just trying to understand what is trust and how does it work. So definition of trust is it's a willingness to be vulnerable to the intentions and actions of others. So this is a really important idea, this notion of trust is vulnerability, and it's important for a couple of reasons. One is it gets you focused on the view of the other person. So trust is not about you and what you think. It's really whether this other person, this other party is willing to make themselves vulnerable to you. And we know that when we trust companies, that we are highly vulnerable. They have to deliver the goods and services we're hoping for. They treat us well, hopefully. They have policies that respect us. And so we're vulnerable because organizations have power. When we trust them, we give them power over us. And so trust is also a kind of a moral concept. It really has to do with whether or not that trust is something that we can count on them and that power being well managed, or whether it's going to be abused.
Well, and it's interesting when you talk about trusting companies, because companies are, I mean, I guess you would say an object, it's a thing, but it's a container that's comprised of, sometimes one, sometimes millions of humans that are, interacting with customers and building the products and services and talking about them and leading them. And how does that trust in companies then filter into the humans and the humans that are creating those companies?
All of the decisions, Kristy, that you just described, what products and services we create, how we actually deliver them, how we treat the people inside the organization who helps us build them, all of those are done by people, right? And so, the company is the vehicle to house all of the resources, financial, human, technical, that are required to actually do business. But trust really works inside business because businesses are managed by leaders and by people who are in them. And so it's very much about managing relationships with the stakeholders of the company, whether it's your customers, your employees, your suppliers, even the government as your regulator. All of these are relationships where trust can either be built or lost depending on how you operate.
Well, and if trust is connected and tied to, vulnerability and being vulnerable, that's not something we oftentimes hear in the same sentence. Vulnerable CEOs. You don't, you're not. It's not the front page of the Wall Street Journal. This vulnerable CEO is, leading the way. It's usually this, hard hitting CEO, this non-yielding, this, and I know that those descriptors aren't, quite opposites to each other. But talk to me more about vulnerability and leadership. How does that really manifest itself in the actions of leaders and the way that they build that trust?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And let me, in a way, turn the tables on it. So I'm not talking necessarily about whether or not leaders make themselves vulnerable. Although leaders are, in fact, highly vulnerable to the actions and intentions of all the people inside the organization. So, leader's one person, maybe, a leadership team, maybe 8 people, 10 people. Those people don't themselves do all the things that produce the goods and services that the business is responsible for. So, in that sense, leaders are actually vulnerable to the people inside the organization. And you know that there's a trend of a kind of growing power and an acknowledgement that the people inside companies actually have the power to actually make things better or to leave and make them harder. But when I talk about trust is vulnerability, it's really the vulnerability of the person who is putting their hands, their life in the hands of the company. And so it's the other person. And that's actually the trick about managing trust, is that you have to stay focused on the other person's expectations and whether or not they're being met. Because that's what creates trust, is when I have a series of expectations for how I'm going to be treated by a given company in my engagement with them, and I judge them, as trustworthy or not based on how they treat me.
Are there specific companies or leaders that stand out to you for their ability to harness the trust of their constituents?
So there's a terrific female leader, a woman named Sarah Al-Suhaimi, who actually managed a remarkable turnaround of an investment bank in Saudi Arabia. And she did this, at this beginning at the age of 34. She became CEO of this bank because she had had a track record at that point of 10 years of really successful investment performance. And she had found a way to exist within a very challenging set of norms and circumstances. And when she went into that bank, the relations with every single stakeholder were broken. The regulator had just imposed the largest fine they'd ever imposed on a bank in Saudi Arabia. The parent company, the bank that owned them, hated their products and services. Customers weren't happy with them. Employees were demoralized. And so she came in and basically exhibited kind of the 4 things that you need to be good at in order to be trusted. So the first of those is competence. And competence is absolutely the foundation of trust. You wouldn't trust a company that wasn't good at what it did, and you're not going to trust a leader who's not capable of being effective as a leader. Many different ways to get there, but you still have to be judged as competent as a leader. The next thing you have to be good at is motives, meaning that people judge whether or not they want to trust you based on whose interests they see you serving. And so in the case of Sarah Al-Suhaimi, she really was able to help guide her organization to pay careful attention to all the broken promises and expectations that the parent bank had, that the customers had, and even inside the bank that people had. And so people are going to judge you based on whether or not you see them taking other people's interests into account. And then the third thing you have to be pretty good at is what you could think of as is fairness, or the means, how you go about accomplishing what you do. So one thing, in most turnarounds, which this was, you have to come in and some people are just not going to make it in the organization. And she established a really fair process of the kind of thing that you would hope people would do with you, where they lay out here the performance expectations that we have. They give you some time to figuring out whether or not you can actually make good on those. Together, you discuss them. And at the end, you pretty much end up sort of taking yourself out of the equation. Virtually all the people that she wanted to leave did leave, but they left understanding that they just weren't a good fit with the business. And so she was perceived by all the people in the organization as being very fair. And that kind of fairness was true in her relations with all of the other stakeholders. And then the last thing that you're judged on is the actual impact of your actions. So I'm not talking here about what you intend to do. It's really what are the kind of on the ground, I can see it with my own eyes, I don't need you to tell me about it, effect of your actions. And her ability to actually manage this turnaround was remarkable, from making no money and being a business that no one pretty much wanted to do business with. They ended up being the leading investment bank in Saudi Arabia. And it was a remarkable effect of having really good processes to get to where she needed to go. So if you're a leader, the things you are going to be judged on are these questions of whether you're competent, what your motives are, what your means are, how fairly you going about your business, and the last is what's the actual impact, the results of the actions that people can judge and see. So that's how to think about that. These are not irrational decisions that people make when they trust. Trust is actually quite specific. And so each one of these stakeholder groups had a different reason for trusting the bank or not, and she had to work on those.
And do you think that a leader who, as in this example, and can really help to build that trust, is that something that comes naturally? I mean, you are talking about characteristics and actions that, may not be theirs alone. It's part of a team, or, something that's learned, of course, through competency and whatnot. But it also feels like it's something you're born with, right? That ability to really connect with that user and to understand them and to want to build that trust.
I think for some people it is a kind of a native ability. Some people are just born in a way that makes them more sensitive to other people. I would argue, in particular, because we're talking to other women, that women, because of what we have to go through to establish ourselves in our careers, we're taught to observe things and to pay attention to what matters to people. And I think that puts us in a good position to win trust and to build trust with people because we're good at observing other people's needs. So can guys get there? Absolutely. And I wouldn't treat this as something that only if you're born with it. Sarah Al-Suhaimi had to learn how to manage and navigate her environment. I mean, there were no women's bathrooms on the floor where she was working. And so she had to figure out how to navigate that. There was no desk for her because women weren't allowed to have their own workspaces. And so no one teaches you, how to be both patient, work within the system, and then try to kind of figure out how it's going to work for you. So I would say that, these are skills and a kind of a mindset that you can adopt And it's helped at times by the kind of background that you bring to it, but it also just is helped by being intentional and understanding that it's the other person's trust that matters, and that your road to being trusted by them, it has to do with understanding their expectations of you and how well you've met them.
Trust in companies and leadership has been, I mean, very top of mind, particularly the past, year and a half, 2 years, right? We have, our companies responded to the pandemic, how they, treated their employees, how they treated their communities or customers, gone through an important time of racial reckoning, and looking at leaders and their work on that and towards that. We've, looked at our environment and the impact of businesses on the environment. I mean, there's so much happening in this world. And as you said, companies are being held accountable, employees and consumers are speaking out more, or we're carrying more weight in these conversations. And what has been your perspective on the past, year and a half, and how this has impacted your research, and the consumer mindset around trust?
Hmm. I'll speak to two issues. One is just the effect of COVID and the pandemic. This was unprecedented is the term that's rightfully used to describe this. And we've never actually in a long time had a single yardstick against which all companies are measured. And right now, there's a kind of a new yardstick, and it's called employee and customer health and safety. So it used to be that unless you were in heavy manufacture, extractive industries, mining, you didn't really have to worry that much about safety. Now this is everyone's game. And so I think that has made people much more sensitive to the weight and impact of the decisions that they have. And I think that people are being judged, companies are being judged as to how good or poorly they manage that. So I think that that's been part of it. And I agree with you. I think that there's now an expanded footprint of expectations for business. And that expanded footprint requires you to earn trust in different domains, many of which are not that comfortable as spaces to live in. So dealing with racial injustice, income inequality, gender, harassment, all of those are kind of spaces where in the past, I think it wasn't as prominent for people to say, well, guess what? Being a good business, you now have to be good at that. And so that is why some of these ideas around trust and learning how to take the perspective of the other person, understanding they are vulnerable to your actions, that's why this is a useful mindset to adopt, because it really does help you stay focused on the expectations of other people and how it is that they're going to be judging you.
Well, and I know that a conversation that comes up a lot is that leaders are focused on, the bottom line, on the financials of the business and the financial health. And so many of these things, such as, gender equality or diversity or best practices for supporting maybe communities and employees, aren't always top of mind. But I know that there's a recent study by Deloitte that finds that, an adverse event or scandal related to trust can erode a company's market cap by up to 50%. And 85% of customers will abandon a brand in wake of such an incident. And so I'm not quite giving the perfect examples for this data set, but it is all tied together. Trust is tied to a company's business viability and financial health. And so, for you, like, do you really see that a lot in the conversations you're having, the research you're doing around the impact of trust and a company's viability?
I absolutely do. And I have those conversations in some different sorts of domains. I've been doing work actually with Deloitte since 2019 on a measurement tool that they have to try to understand how trust looks from the outside in, the way that these people judge it. And I've worked with them on their trust initiative. I've worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers, which has just launched a new, leadership trust initiative. And that's a training initiative to try to get over time 10,000, CEOs and high promotes educated in the principles of trust and how it works. I work with the Edelman people who do the trust barometer. And so, to a certain extent, these are the waters I swim in anyway. But I don't think that, these money-making groups like PwC or Deloitte or Edelman for that matter, I think that they are interested in part because they believe this and also because this is what their clients are telling them. And so it's really out of their desire to be helpful that they've been focused so much on trying to figure out what ways, how do you measure trust? If you wanted to get better at it, what would that look like? What kind of initiatives would you actually launch? And that, and so there's interest there. And of course, they'll be interested at Harvard Business School where I teach. And so I think that this topic is something that will have a lot of people trying to get practical about it and try to figure out what is this trust thing and how can I get better at it with the people who matter.
Has there been any surprises in your research that you didn't expect?
I would say that the notion of trust is vulnerability. That kind of blew me away. Sorry, I'm a child of the 60s in terms of my language. I myself, just as you had the same reaction, well, like, whose vulnerability? What do you mean vulnerable? We don't talk about that, unless you're asking, some leader to tell a story personally about themselves so they look more human. But it's not actually what's meant here. It's the actual fact of being reliant on someone else to satisfy your wants and needs in ways that respect you. And so that actually was just a profound understanding that then allowed me to do so much of the work, because once you go down that path, you understand it's the other people who matter. Then you start sort of having a way to understand, okay, well, if I'm going to do a case about this, what kind of case would I write and what kind of company would I go for? So I would say that was the biggest surprise.
So it's so interesting, and I love that we're having this conversation. Well, Sandra, I wanted to close this out, getting to know a little bit more about you, and I have a quick lightning round. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and if you could just do me the humor me and answer them. So, what's your favorite day of the week?
Favorite day of the week is Friday. I mean, who doesn't have Friday as their favorite day of the week? So sorry, it's before the weekend.
I'm particular to Fridays too, but you have a few days ahead of you that you're like, yes, freedom.
Right. It's coming, right?
Who would be your dream dinner guest?
I actually was thinking about this one. I think right now it'd be Sonia Sotomayor.
Especially this week.
Exactly. I would just love to talk with her about how she understands what's happening right now in the Supreme Court.
Yeah. That she's great. That would be a very interesting conversation. Do you have a favorite recent read?
Yes, it's a recent watch. So I'm a huge fan of what's called K-drama, which are Korean TV shows. So most people at this point have heard of Squid Game.
Yep.
That's like an example of it. There are better ones that are more fun to watch. And so if you have Netflix, you can look for something called Crash Landing on You. So this was an international sensation. It's a remarkable story about some woman from South Korea who ends up paragliding into North Korea. And it's about her romance with a guy who is an officer in the North Korean army. And it's just that they're remarkable to get immersed into a different culture and to understand just different ways of thinking. And I find them endlessly entertaining. I started watching these during COVID lockdown. And so now it's just something I do all the time for fun.
Do you watch them dubbed or with subtitles?
Oh, with subtitles. Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, no, I actually enjoy the sort of sound of hearing the Korean, and then so I now know what it sounds like when someone says yes or no, and stuff like that. And so and that's important to me because I feel like I want to purposely immerse myself into someone else's culture.
I appreciate that. What is your top self-care practice?
At the moment, it is actually just holding and scratching my COVID puppy, who is a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. He's just a year old. His name is Winston, and he's black and tan. He's just wonderful, and he's just so cuddly. And so I must say that there's at the moment that besides being able to be with my granddaughters, but they're in New York, that's like my favorite self-care thing to do.
My 8-year-old is desperate for a dog. Desperate.
Oh, yep.
And we just can't. Right. I mean, living in Brooklyn and it just we're running all over the place all the time, and so it's just not the right time for us. But my entire family has dogs, and my next door neighbor just got a little toy poodle. So that's Morgan. My daughter's gonna help co-parent that dog for the time being.
That's great.
I know. I just am like, go over, go see Tootsie. Her name's Tootsie. So.
Of course it is, right?
Well, any final thoughts you want to leave with our listeners here today?
Just when I was contacted by Kristy, and I will do any event for women. I have always been a huge supporter of women in business. And so, I think this is just, I'm a woman much further along in my career than many of you. And you just have a wonderful life ahead of you in terms of both what you can do at work and what you can do at home. So just my heart goes out to you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. It was such an honor to get to chat with you and to learn from you and your research.
Well, thank you so much, Kristy. It's great to talk with you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to my conversation with Sandra. I hope that you are as inspired as I was. Lots of great insights on the power of trust. And as Maricella, yep.
I trust you.
Thank you. That means a lot, Maricella. I hope so. We've been working together for years.
I know. It just felt like, sometimes we don't say things, but yeah.
I'm inspired. Just say it. Just say it. Don't wait for the right opportunity. Just say it. Well, we all need to hear it more, and
I think so.
I think especially the more. This is gonna, I guess, sound bad about my kids, but I feel like I do so much for them, and they're like, thanks for dinner, Mom, but like in general, thanks for keeping me clothed and healthy and alive is not something that's top of mind for them to say. And also, when you lead a company, you're probably the last person to get recognized and thanks, because maybe it just comes as an expectation, that whoever's in charge is gonna take care of you. And so I really do appreciate that, and encourage everyone to, who should you say thanks to today?
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
It does. I would agree. So Maricella, you have a really exciting roundtable coming up. What is the topic?
I do. I was talking about the roundtables before we went to the interview. My next Rising Leaders roundtable on Thursdays at noon Eastern is going to be on grit and growth mindset. We've been having quite a few discussions about how to get more comfortable with discomfort and how to really build feedback cultures. So grit and growth mindset kind of also stems from those. We're kind of building up on a theme here, if you can tell, of being stronger and better.
That is exciting. And it's all an evolution, right? We were talking earlier about goals, and it's not going from 0 to 100 in one step. It's what are that hour you can spend each week to learn from others, to support others, to have these real conversations that impact us as professionals, And, it's one step at a time. So if you can commit an hour a week, that's a great hour. And we really aim at Ellevate to make it the most impactful hour of your week, where you're not just making connections, but you're talking about the topics that will help you to grow and to, find success, however you define that. Our other roundtables, such as our Entrepreneurs Roundtable, will be covering growing relationships and impact through collaboration. So that's very important, of course, as you're building your business. The Career Changers Roundtable is going to talk about tips and tricks to help you ace your next job interview. Also highly impactful. If you want to ace that interview, I know you can, but it never helps to learn from the experts and from your peers. And at our Executive Roundtable, which is every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to talk about flipping the script from fear to opportunity. So important conversations happening. And I encourage all of you, check out EllevateNetwork.com, see what roundtables we have coming up, what are the topics, join us. We would love to meet you and love to help support you in these conversations. I can assure you it will be an experience you don't want to miss.
Yeah, and it might sound a little scary to say, yeah, I'm going to go into this group and they're going to talk for 15 minutes and with a guest expert, and then I'm going to have to go into breakout rooms and it's another Zoom meeting and I don't know these people and will I belong? Is this my group? You do. It's a group of really, really, really incredibly smart, incredibly talented, incredibly kind women. Let your fear go and join us.
I mean, if you would want to hang out with Maricella and I, then you totally want to go to the roundtables because we'll be there.
Of course.
There you go. I'm sold.
Maricella, didn't you meet a podcast fan in a roundtable recently?
Oh yeah, a couple of weeks ago, actually, we were in our breakout room, and we always start with short. This is me. This is what I do. I always open the roundtables, and then when I was in my breakout room, one of the guests there was like, "Oh my God, I'm so happy it's you because I listened to the podcast for years."
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and then yesterday in my breakout room, I met someone from El Salvador.
That is awesome. Yeah, you meet some really great people. And as Maricella said, it's a welcoming and amazing community of driven, ambitious, successful, but kind and curious and supportive women. And I don't know why I felt like I had to qualify that. That actually isn't sitting well with me, but there's just so many stereotypes around, the queen bee and, women in the workplace and, are they ambitious? Are they not? And what does that look like? And let's get rid of all of that because we just have some amazing people who want to see you succeed. We're humans and we're really cool.
You know what the catch is there is not saying but. I've been thinking about it a lot too because I always used to say smart and ambitious but kind and generous. It's smart, ambitious, and kind and generous.
Yeah. You can be all those things.
All those things.
Well, we have amazing women in the Ellevate community, but we also have some pretty spectacular women in the world who are doing great things. And this is our first section, which we still want to rename. So let us know your thoughts.
Yeah.
Women who are making history.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, we do have women who are making history. Tess Ledoux became the first woman to claim gold in both the ski big air and ski slope style events in X Games history.
I love the Winter Games and X Games. Tamika Nelson became the first female chief of the San Diego County Probation Department.
Allison Chestnut has become the first woman in history to captain a golf club in Northern Ireland.
Oh, now I want to go to Ireland.
Oh, me too.
Christine Allo became the first woman commissioner of the Cambridge Police Department.
Cassandra Bordeaux, and I'm probably butchering that, and I feel so bad. Cassandra Bordeaux became the first woman appointed to the role of Night Watch in Lausanne, Switzerland, a role that has existed for over 600 years. So 600 years too late, but we got there.
I wonder if the Night Watch isn't that what Game of Thrones is
Oh,
called?
winter is coming.
Winter is coming.
Winter's here.
And Montel Douglas became the first woman to compete for Britain at both the Summer and Winter Olympics. She represented Britain in track and field in the 2008 Summer Olympics and bobsled in the 2022 Winter Olympics. Both games were in Beijing, so apparently that's her lucky city. So lots of great history makers here. And again, we can all make history every day. We're sending you the good vibes. I hope this inspires you to take on that challenge and to go for it.
Yeah, and remember, it's not just about the big wins. It's also about the small ones. You can make a difference and make history by just telling someone that you care. Trust me.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for this week's podcast. Next week, we have a special friend, Jacques-Philippe Piviger, who is co-founder and managing partner of Ozone X, an early-stage VC firm purpose-built to invest and scale mission-driven tech companies founded by women and Latinx, as well as underrepresented individuals. We love talking to allies who are creating real change for the women in our community and beyond. And so join us next week for my conversation with Jacques-Philippe.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.